was a man of pedigree, y'all. In Philippians 3:5, he says he was circumcised the 8th day, of the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. As touching the law, he was a Pharisee. Now listen, he was saturated with a life centered around all things related to the law. Had a lot of zeal. He had a lot of energy and a lot of passion, but it was for the wrong things. He had pedigree now. This man would have probably been wealthy, well-connected. He knew folks, great education, private school, had the best tutors, knew all the things, but was not yet living on purpose. When you look at Acts chapter 8, you start to see what Paul's life really looked like. It says, Acts chapter 8, the first 3 verses, it says, and Saul, because at the time he was still Saul, approved of his execution, because now we're in the middle of a story about a disciple named Stephen who was about to be stoned for proclaiming the name of Jesus. It says Saul approved of his execution. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. In verse 3, but Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Listen, dragging off men and women. Paul was not neutral about Jesus Christ being Messiah. He wasn't like, you do you, I'll do me, you walk in your truth. No, he was hardcore passionate against the church of God, against the message that Jesus was Messiah, because he was so rooted in the law, he could not see that Jesus had come to actually fulfill that law. He was so rooted in it. And this is important to know how deeply rooted he was in it, because that makes his transformation that much more powerful. In Acts chapter 9, the first 2 verses, it says, but Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked them for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way. If you ever read old text, the way was like the code name for being Christians. They didn't want to be like, are you down with Jesus? Because that might get you killed. They were just like, are you in the way? Yes, I'm in the way. So Paul was looking for people belonging to the way, men or women, because he didn't discriminate, equal opportunity legalist. He might bring them bound to Jerusalem. His goal was, okay, not just in my city, but let me just be a witness for my own belief and go around city to city and try to find as many Christians as I can and imprison them. Now listen, somebody say suddenly. Y'all got to say it like you know what's about to suddenly. Listen, you can put that in the chat. Suddenly, Acts chapter 9, 3-4. On the way to what he thought was about to be the mission that he was set out to accomplish. On the way, y'all, this was about to be the promotion of his career. This was about to be the pinnacle of all of his anti-God activity. This was going to seal him in history. You know, when you think this, when I get this interview, when I get this next deal, oh, this is about to be it. And on the way, Jesus will change your course. It says, now as he went on his way, he's trying to persecute people who belong to the way, because there's only one. But all the way on his way, because when you're trying to go your way and not according to the way, that's when Jesus will interrupt you. As he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now, can I tell you how powerful this is? Because again, Paul at the time wasn't neutral to the church. He hated anything that proclaimed Jesus as Messiah. And now Jesus himself finds Saul on his way to doing some of his worst behavior. And he doesn't say, I'm going to cut you off. Punishment is coming. Here are your consequences. He says, why are you persecuting me? He invites him to know him, y'all. And it says that Paul, if you read the rest of that passage, his eyes were open. Scales came on his eyes and they fell off, and he was able to see Jesus for the first time. Because an encounter with Jesus is the only thing that changes the heart of an oppressor. You need to understand that oppression is not new to America. Oppression is a part of humanity. We are always looking for reasons to make ourselves better than someone else, to make ourselves more powerful. And Paul was a chief oppressor. And instead of Jesus coming to him with the Senate bill and the House bill, and let me tell you what action you need to take, and we're going to march against you, he said, why are you persecuting me? Now, we need to know this, church, because all of our active duty, all of our votes, all of our civic stances are important, but nothing changes the heart of an oppressor except an encounter with Jesus. There is no bill, there is no march, there is no t-shirt, there is no visual, there's no hashtag that changes the hearts of oppressors. And if you are a person that lays claim to Jesus, the heart change ought to be more important than the law change. You ought to be okay knowing that things are not going to be great until Jesus comes back, that this is a part of life. We do our part, but we don't expect perfection. But what he's called us to do is to be his witnesses, to go and make disciples. And I'm wondering, do we know how to invite people to an encounter with Jesus Christ? I'm not talking about sharing a quote that touched you or giving them a link so they can watch service on their own. Can you invite people to an encounter with Jesus Christ? Because if you cannot, do not wonder why this world remains unchanged. Because we have people in our culture who strongly believe what they believe against Jesus Christ. They have no problem coming at you in the comment section. They have no problem telling you that the church is messy and that's why I don't do this and God is supposed to be love, which means basically you agree with everything I think. They have no problem arguing against what we say we believe. But when it's time for us to speak up, we're so worried about being canceled that we stay quiet. And so we wonder how we're going to encounter people who are knee-deep, waist-deep, neck-deep in what they believe, and then we throw in them this ankle-deep faith about Jesus Christ. Oh, he blesses you. He's your homie, and he's dope. He comes alongside, and whatever you want to do, if you pray, then God is going to hook it up for you. And when he hooks it up, make sure and shout it out, oh, only God. Look at what God has done. So we present him as this person who just blesses, a person who brings this problem-free life. We present a shallow faith and wondering why it's not creating deep change. Only an encounter with Jesus Christ changes the heart of an oppressor. And in true Paul fashion, he was changed suddenly, immediately, and thoroughly. Because it says in Acts chapter 9, the second half of verse 19 to verse 20, it says, for some days he was with the disciples at Damascus. And immediately, y'all say immediately, he proclaimed Jesus in the synagogue, saying, he is the Son of God. They're going to come for him. And here's how Paul responds. He's going to stand his ground, knowing that even though his transformation was sudden, it wasn't perfect. And we have to be able to do the same thing. Okay, now listen, let me show you some things in Paul's life. So in case you're looking for affirmation of God's purpose and you got your vision board and your word for the year, you got all this stuff laid out and you're praying for it, you're going to coaching sessions, all the things. Let me show you some things that need to be true if what you say you're doing is God's purpose for your life. God has set you apart for this before you were born. Set you apart before you, y'all say set apart. See, in Galatians 1:13, when Paul is talking to the church of Galatia, he says, listen, the grace of God, he set me apart and called me from my mother's womb. Now, this is critical because that means while Paul was going against God, he still had calling on his life. So we cannot look at people and decide how they're living today and know what God has called them to forever. Because you don't want anybody to look at your life and the way you act today and be able to determine what God has called you to. See, calling comes at birth. The way you find it is up to you. But it don't have to be created. You don't have to conjure it up. It just needs to be claimed. It's already there. God has already marked you. And let me tell you what that means. There are no parents, no family, no heritage, no environment, no socioeconomic status, public school, private school, 2 parents in the home, 1 parent in the home, physical issues, financial strain. None of that has anything to do with what God has called you to do. Because he set it on you at birth. He marked it in your DNA. He determined who you would be beforehand. All you do is have to say yes. So you cannot say, but God, I need this to line up. But God, look at these disadvantages. But God, because his calling has nothing to do with your circumstances. It was set on you at birth. So you need to know that we are living out God's dream for us, not our parents' dream. Your parents' dream doesn't determine your destiny. Your family's discouragement doesn't outweigh God's destiny. Don't equate your purpose with trying to prove somebody wrong. It's a waste of life. If you get to the top of whatever ladder you built for yourself and your only claim is this is what they said I could never do, that is a shallow life. Instead of worried about what everybody else said you couldn't do, why don't you ask God what he told you to do? See, we live in life in reverse. He set it on you at birth, which means that has to be the thing you pursue above all else.